He was convicted of an $11 billion fraud. Then his yacht sank. He was on it. In June 2024, a jury in San Francisco found Mike Lynch guilty of fraud. It was the end of a legal battle that had lasted over a decade, one of the most expensive and complicated fraud trials in British and American legal history. Lynch had been called Britain's Bill Gates. He had built one of the UK's most celebrated technology companies from a Cambridge laboratory in the 1990s and sold it to Hewlett-Packard for $11 billion. HP then wrote off $8.8 billion of that within a year, claiming the company had not been worth what Lynch had told them it was worth. Lynch denied it until the end. He was convicted anyway. 6 weeks later, his superyacht sank off the coast of Sicily. He did not survive. To understand why the autonomy case mattered so much to Britain, to America, and to the technology industry globally, you need to understand what Mike Lynch had built and what he represented. Lynch grew up in Essex, the son of an Irish firefighter, and studied natural sciences at Cambridge, where he completed a PhD in signal processing. He was not a Silicon Valley archetype. He was deeply, distinctively British, intellectual, understated, occasionally abrasive, more comfortable discussing information theory than venture capital. In 1996, he co-founded Autonomy Corporation in Cambridge with a small team, and an idea that was genuinely ahead of its time. Autonomy's core technology was built around what Lynch called the Intelligent Data Operating Layer, IDLE, a system that used probabilistic mathematics to analyze and extract meaning from unstructured data. In the mid-1990s, when most enterprise software was designed to work with structured databases, the idea that a system could meaningfully process emails, documents, audio, video, and other unstructured content and surface relevant information automatically was visionary. The technology was real, the mathematics behind it was sound, and the applications were genuinely valuable to large enterprises and government agencies managing enormous volumes of unstructured information. Autonomy grew steadily through the late 1990s and 2000s, winning contracts with governments, intelligence agencies, financial institutions, and large corporations. It listed on the London Stock Exchange and became one of the most valuable technology companies in the UK. Lynch became a prominent public figure, a rare British tech success story at a time when British entrepreneurs consistently lost ground to American competitors. He served on government advisory boards. He received honorary degrees. He was celebrated as proof that world-class technology innovation could happen outside California. By 2011, Autonomy had revenues of approximately $1 billion annually and was growing. Lynch had built something that the technology industry genuinely valued, and the acquisition interest from major American technology companies reflected that. When Hewlett-Packard, under its CEO Leo Apotheker, approached Autonomy about an acquisition, it was not chasing an empty shell. It was pursuing a company with real technology, real customers, and real revenue. The question that would consume the next decade of litigation was not whether Autonomy had value. It clearly did. But whether the value Lynch had presented to HP's board and due diligence teams accurately reflected the company's true financial position, or whether it had been inflated through accounting practices designed to make Autonomy look more valuable than it actually was. Lynch maintained throughout the entire period of litigation and trial that Autonomy's accounts were prepared in accordance with international financial reporting standards, and that any disagreements about accounting treatment were legitimate interpretive differences rather than fraud. HP and American prosecutors maintained that Lynch and his CFO had deliberately misrepresented Autonomy's revenue, its business mix, and its growth trajectory in order to extract a sale price far above what the company would have achieved on a fully transparent basis. That disagreement, between two parties with billions of dollars and a man's freedom at stake, was what the trial was ultimately about. The acquisition of Autonomy by Hewlett-Packard in October 2011 was, at the time, celebrated in the UK as a validation of British technology. The $11.1 billion price tag made it one of the largest software acquisitions in history. Lynch and his team had negotiated an extraordinary premium. HP was paying approximately 11 times Autonomy's annual revenue, a valuation that reflected not just the company's current performance, but its projected growth trajectory and the strategic value of its technology to HP's enterprise software ambitions. Within 12 months, HP had written down the value of Autonomy by $8.8 billion, stating in November 2012 that it had discovered evidence of serious accounting improprieties, misrepresentation, and disclosure failures by Autonomy's former management prior to the acquisition. HP alleged that Autonomy had artificially inflated its revenues by improperly recognizing sales of hardware, physical computer equipment, as if they were high-margin software sales, making the company's revenue mix and profit margins appear significantly better than they actually were. HP also alleged that Autonomy had booked revenues from transactions with resellers who were, in reality, funded by Autonomy itself in circular arrangements designed to create the appearance of genuine arm's-length sales. Lynch rejected all of these allegations categorically and publicly. He argued that HP's accounting write-down was a cover story designed to distract from HP's own catastrophic mismanagement of the acquisition and its failure to integrate Autonomy effectively. He pointed out that HP had conducted extensive due diligence before the acquisition, including review by major accounting firms, and that no irregularities had been identified at that stage. He argued that the accounting treatments HP was now characterizing as fraudulent were legitimate under IFRS standards and had been consistently applied and disclosed. The dispute became one of the most acrimonious and expensive corporate legal battles in recent history. HP filed a civil lawsuit against Lynch in the UK. American prosecutors, after a lengthy investigation, filed criminal fraud charges against Lynch and Autonomy's former CFO, Sicily Hussein. Hussein was extradited to the United States, tried separately, and convicted in 2018. Lynch fought extradition for years, arguing that, as a British citizen who had conducted business in the UK under UK accounting standards, he should be tried in the UK, if tried at all, not in an American court applying American legal standards to British accounting practices. The extradition battle itself became a cause célèbre in Britain. Tech industry figures, legal scholars, and politicians argued that the case set a dangerous precedent, that American prosecutors could pursue foreign executives for business decisions made on foreign soil under foreign accounting rules simply because the other party to a transaction was American. Others argued that fraud is fraud, regardless of jurisdiction, and that Lynch's resistance to extradition was itself evidence of consciousness of guilt. Lynch was eventually extradited in May 2023, after the UK Home Secretary approved the request, following years of appeals. He arrived in San Francisco to face trial on 15 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Here is what most people never learned about the trial itself. Lynch chose to testify in his own defense, something defendants in American fraud cases almost never do. He spent weeks on the witness stand, and for a while, it looked like it might actually work. Stay with me. The trial of Mike Lynch began in San Francisco in March 2024 and ran for approximately 3 months, making it one of the longest and most complex criminal fraud trials in recent American legal history. The prosecution's case rested on detailed testimony from former Autonomy employees and executives, forensic accounting analysis of Autonomy's historical financial records, and the testimony of HP executives and advisors who described what they had been told about Autonomy's business before the acquisition and how it differed from what they later found. The government's witnesses described a systematic effort to manipulate Autonomy's revenue figures, particularly in the quarters leading up to the sale. Former employees testified about pressure from Lynch and his CFO to close transactions before quarter end, regardless of whether the underlying business arrangements were genuine, about hardware sales being misclassified in financial systems, and about reseller deals structured in ways that created the appearance of revenue without genuine economic substance behind them. The prosecution argued that Lynch had personally directed these practices and was fully aware that the financial picture being presented to HP was materially false. Lynch's defense strategy was built around 2 central arguments. The first was that the accounting treatments HP was characterizing as fraud were legitimate interpretive choices made by Autonomy's accountants in accordance with applicable standards, reviewed and approved by external auditors, and clearly enough disclosed in Autonomy's public filings that HP's extensive due diligence team should have understood them. The second was that HP had fundamentally mismanaged the acquisition and was now blaming Autonomy's former management for its own strategic failures. Lynch himself testified for weeks. He was, by multiple accounts from journalists covering the trial, an extraordinarily effective witness, calm, technically detailed, and genuinely difficult to rattle under cross-examination. He walked the jury through the mathematics of autonomy's technology, the economics of its business model, and the specifics of the transactions the government had characterized as fraudulent, providing alternative explanations for each one that were at least plausible on their own terms. His willingness to testify in his own defense, a calculated risk that most white-collar defense attorneys advise against, appeared at various points during the trial to be working. In June 2024, the jury returned a guilty verdict on all counts. Lynch was convicted on all 15 counts of wire fraud and the single count of conspiracy. The verdict was unambiguous. Sentencing was scheduled for later in 2024. Lynch remained free on bail pending sentencing. On August 19, 2024, Lynch was aboard his superyacht, the Betrayals, anchored off the coast of Porticello in Sicily, with family members and friends celebrating his acquittal in a parallel UK civil case. In the early hours of the morning, a violent and unexpected storm struck the area. The Betrayals sank rapidly. Most aboard survived by jumping into the water. Mike Lynch did not. He was among 7 people who died. His body was recovered by Italian divers several days later. He never appeared in court for sentencing. He never served a day in prison. The death of Mike Lynch created a legal situation without clear precedent. He had been convicted, but not yet sentenced. American law does not permit posthumous sentencing, or the continuation of criminal proceedings against someone who has died. The case against Lynch was formally dismissed following his death, as a standard procedure. He died a convicted fraudster in the eyes of American law, but one who never faced the sentencing consequences of that conviction, and never had the opportunity to appeal the verdict through the full appellate process that might have taken years to complete. His co-defendant in the original indictment, former Autonomy CFO Sishovan Hussain, had been convicted separately in 2018 and sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. He served that sentence. The contrast between the outcomes for the 2 men, one dead at sea weeks after conviction, one having served a prison term 6 years earlier, underscored the extraordinary and arbitrary nature of how the case ultimately resolved. In Britain, the reaction to Lynch's death was complex and revealing. Many in the British technology community, who had supported his position throughout the extradition battle and the trial, responded with grief and with a renewed conviction that Lynch had been wrongly prosecuted. The argument that an American jury had convicted a British entrepreneur for accounting decisions made under British standards and reviewed by British auditors remained deeply contested. Several prominent British technology figures publicly stated their belief that Lynch had been the victim of an overreaching American prosecution rather than a genuine fraudster. HP, for its part, had already reached a civil settlement with Lynch before the criminal trial concluded. The terms of that settlement were confidential, but the fact that HP chose to settle its civil claims rather than pursue them to judgment suggested that the civil case was not as straightforward as HP's public statements had consistently implied. The company that had lost $8.8 billion on the Autonomy acquisition never recovered those funds, and the executives who approved that acquisition, including CEO Leo Apotheker, who was fired shortly after the deal closed, faced their own accountability questions that were never fully resolved publicly. The Autonomy case left the technology industry with a series of genuinely unresolved questions. When a company is acquired and the acquirer subsequently loses billions, who is responsible? Were those losses the result of fraud by the seller, incompetence by the buyer, or simply the inherent unpredictability of technology acquisitions? When accounting standards differ between jurisdictions, and a transaction is structured in the gap between them, is that fraud or arbitrage? These questions do not have clean answers, and the death of Mike Lynch before his appeal meant that the American legal system's answer, guilty on all counts, stands as the final word, contested though it remains by many who followed the case closely. The ocean, as it turned out, offered no verdict at all. Before we finish, drop one word in the comments. Do you think Mike Lynch was guilty, or do you think Britain's Bill Gates was prosecuted for something that wasn't really a crime? One word, guilty or innocent, because this one genuinely divides people. I read every single one. Some cases end in prison. Some end in acquittal. This one ended in the ocean. The next case we're covering ended in something nobody saw coming, either. Subscribe.